In 1983, inside the locked records room of the old Colorado State Hospital, a manila envelope surfaced from the back of a forgotten cabinet. The seal was intact, the paper brittle, the handwriting faded to the shade of bone. Inside lay 12 index cards. Each card carried a name, a date of birth, and one chilling line. Subject: observation continues. 6 of those cards bore red pencil marks. 6 did not. No reports were attached. No explanation was left behind. Just the suggestion that someone, decades earlier, had divided 12 lives into 2 groups: those who would endure and those who would not. The handwriting was careful, calm, without urgency. But the dates told another story. From 1945 through 1968, 12 children, all born to the same home on Hidden Valley Road, were catalogued in silence. On the back of each card, cryptic notations appeared. Compliance partial. Observation escalates. Intervention deferred. Words that read like fragments of another language, as if their meaning was never meant for outsiders. The cards had been misfiled among unrelated patient histories. By accident or intention, no one knows. They sat untouched, their red marks fading until that sealed envelope was opened. Perhaps not for the first time, but very likely for the last. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Share your answer in the comments, and while you are here, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Gothic Ledger. These stories, hidden, misfiled, nearly lost, deserve to be remembered. What follows is not folklore. It is reconstruction, a record assembled from medical files, police notes, family testimonies, and those 12 brittle index cards. 6 names will lead us into locked wards and violent outbreaks. 6 others into silent rooms where dread took root quietly. Together, they form a case studied by scientists, debated by psychiatrists, and mourned by survivors. And yet, decades later, it remains unsolved. The house itself was new when it began, a split-level, pale brick home with a clean view of the Air Force Academy. A picture of stability in a polished Colorado Springs neighborhood. Its owners, Donald and Mimi Galvin, were models of Catholic domestic life. He, a military man. She, a devout mother. 12 children in total, 10 boys followed by 2 long-awaited girls. On the surface, the Galvins embodied the ideal. Donald had served in the Pacific Theater during the final, brutal stretch of the war. He returned with what we would now call PTSD, though at the time it was simply nerves. His silence deepened year by year. He withdrew, never violent, but always distant. Mimi, once ambitious for a cultured life in New York, had given her energy entirely to her family. She believed discipline could create excellence. She raised her 12 children with strict order, ironed napkins, spotless floors, polished shoes. At church, the family stood out as an emblem of Catholic devotion, but beneath that order, tension simmered. By the time they moved into their new house in 1963, neighbors already noticed oddities. Bruises on the boys, crashes of glass followed by eerie silence. Their father issued boxing gloves instead of discipline. He called the boys by number instead of name. 4. Clean that up. 6. Get in line. Falconry became the family's strangest ritual. Photos show the boys with hawks perched on gloved arms. For Mimi, it was a symbol of control. To outsiders, it looked like something darker. Wildness tethered, flight restrained. Margaret and Mary, the two daughters born last, grew up in this atmosphere of male aggression and silence. Broken windows were replaced before questions could be asked. Police were never called. Appearances mattered above all else. Inside the home, emotional needs found no space. Affection was absent. Suffering was dismissed. By the late 1960s, some of the Galvin children were showing unmistakable signs of mental illness, psychosis, delusions, violence, but no diagnosis was made, no treatment was sought. The family presented too perfectly on the outside to allow outsiders a glimpse in mask. On paper, the Galvins were exemplary. 12 children, no poverty, no addiction, no visible abuse. Yet whispers spread. Teachers, neighbors, and later doctors repeated the same phrase. Something is wrong in that house. They were right. The house was not a home. It was a pressure chamber. Order against chaos, discipline against an illness that was not visiting from outside, but already alive within. Madness did not arrive suddenly. It seeped slowly and invisibly through the family's genetic code. The story of that seepage began with the firstborn, Donald Jr. He was disciplined, strong, athletic, the model son, but behind the facade, something was unraveling. His first strange acts were subtle. Silent stares at dinner, inexplicable withdrawals. In hindsight, they were early symptoms of schizophrenia. By university, his breaks grew undeniable. At a bonfire, he leapt into the flames without warning, emerging with burns and no explanation. He strangled a cat, left its body hidden in a dorm sink. He carried on as though nothing had happened. At home, he emptied the family living room, placing every piece of furniture outside in silence. He salted the fish tank, killing the aquarium. His parents dismissed these actions as stress. It wasn't until he attempted to murder his wife by forcing her to inhale cyanide fumes that authorities intervened. He was finally diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. It was a long overdue recognition, and by then, 9 younger siblings had already been exposed to his unraveling. He was the first to fall, and the house would never recover. What followed was an almost unprecedented cascade. 5 of Don Jr.'s brothers, James, Brian, Matthew, Peter, and Joseph, would each be diagnosed with schizophrenia, each presenting differently. One became violent, another delusional, another depressive. Their home became not just a household, but an unlicensed psychiatric ward. The daughters, Margaret and Mary, were not spared either. They were never diagnosed, but they lived as witnesses. Witnesses to violence, to silence, to abuse. Later, they would reveal their own trauma molestation by their brothers. Abuse covered in silence, and their mother's cold explanation that it was simply a symptom of illness. By the end, the Galvin home was no longer a family residence. It was a psychiatric unit without records, locked doors, broken furniture, shattered glass. Police came quietly, knowing the address too well. Inside, a mother scrubbed blood from the walls, and a youngest daughter learnt to function like an orderly in her own home. Externally, the Galvins remained a model Catholic family. Lawns trimmed, silver polished, appearances preserved. Internally, their home was a theatre of collapse, where 6 brothers descended into madness, 4 survived in its shadow, and 2 sisters carried trauma that would mark them for life. The Galvin family case remains one of the most studied examples of schizophrenia within a single family. For psychiatrists, it is a rare concentration of genetic illness. For survivors, it was a lifetime of silence, secrets, and survival. What happened on Hidden Valley Road was not an isolated tragedy. It was a window into how families fracture under forces too deep to control. In the Galvin household, madness was not a guest, it was a resident. Donald Jr. was only the beginning. His collapse was dramatic, but it set a pattern that soon echoed through the house. James, the second son, tried to outrun what was coming. He was athletic, promising, a college-bound student, but in his 20s he began hearing voices. At first, he told no one. He thought he could master it, that willpower alone would silence them. It didn't. He began drinking heavily, then violently. His anger became unpredictable. He assaulted a girlfriend, broke furniture in fits of rage, vanished for days without explanation. In the police reports, his parents often intervened to keep his name out of the papers. Quiet deals were made. The Galvin reputation was preserved, even as James unraveled. Brian was next. By all accounts, he was gentle as a boy, almost timid. But his schizophrenia took a different form. Paranoia and delusions consumed him. He believed neighbors were spying, that government forces were signaling through light fixtures that food was poisoned. At first, Mimi told him to ignore it, to pray. When his behavior grew erratic, she minimized it to others. She scrubbed away the evidence, insisted he was just nervous. In truth, Brian was collapsing into a private world of fear. Matthew followed. He had once been artistic, drawn to music and painting. His descent was marked by hallucinations so vivid that reality became impossible to hold. He would disappear into the woods for days, convinced he was being hunted. He was later found wandering highways barefoot, shouting scripture at cars. Each return to the family home was a return to chaos. Peter, the fifth to show signs, drifted into deep depression before psychosis consumed him. He spent days motionless in bed, whispering conversations with people no one else could hear. Later, his violence emerged. He attacked a stranger without reason, then turned on himself. Hospitalizations followed, each longer than the last. Joseph, the youngest of the affected sons, became the most feared. His violence was direct, brutal. He lashed out at his siblings, cornered his sisters, once chased a neighbor with a knife. His behavior could not be hidden. Police were called again and again. But even then, Mimi insisted it was an illness, not evil. She begged authorities to treat him, not jail him. 6 brothers, 6 minds broken by schizophrenia. 6 different manifestations of the same devastating illness. The other 6 siblings lived in the fallout. 4 brothers escaped diagnosis, but not damage. They grew up navigating fear, denial, and violence. Some fled the house and never returned. Others stayed to help, to protect, to manage. But none were untouched. The 2 sisters, Margaret and Mary, carried the deepest scars. As the youngest, they were raised not by parents, but by a collapsing system of secrecy and survival. They endured abuse from their brothers, abuse that was excused as symptoms. When they told their mother, she dismissed them. "They're sick," she said. It isn't their fault. The girls learned that their safety mattered less than appearances. For years, they told no one. Silence was the Galvin family's strongest tradition. By the 1970s, the Galvin home was no longer a residence, but a hidden institution. Locked doors, constant medication, shattered windows. Police cars came often, but the reports were vague. The neighborhood whispered, but no one interfered. The Galvins remained the large Catholic family with 12 children, respected in public, fractured in private. The father, Donald Sr., stayed detached until his death. He retreated to fishing, to hunting, to silence. He never confronted what was happening under his roof. Mimi, the mother, persisted in denial. She ironed, she cleaned, she prayed. She maintained order even as order was impossible. For her, admitting collapse would have meant admitting failure. By the 1980s, the 6 ill brothers were either institutionalized, medicated into silence, or dead. Some succumbed to violence, others to suicide, others to the slow erosion of untreated schizophrenia. Their names filled medical journals, case studies, and research papers. Scientists seized on the Galvins as a rare genetic concentration. Blood samples were taken, DNA analyzed, data published. For medicine, they were subjects. For their sisters, they were brothers lost. It wasn't until decades later, when the sisters broke their silence, that the full story surfaced. Margaret and Mary gave testimony. They spoke of abuse, denial, of a childhood erased by violence and secrecy. Their voices reframed the family from medical curiosity into human tragedy. The Galvin family's suffering did not end in their household. It extended into the laboratories of science. Their DNA became central to schizophrenia research. Geneticists traced markers, mapped mutations, and attempted to unravel the inheritance of madness. Progress was made, papers were written, grants were won, but for the Galvins, healing never came. In the end, the 12 index cards in that brittle envelope were not predictions, but records. 6 red-marked names fell into schizophrenia. 6 remained on the margins, scarred but standing. 12 lives catalogued by an unknown hand, preserved in silence, discovered by chance. The house on Hidden Valley Road still stands. To passers-by, it is just another Colorado home, pale brick, quiet yard, unremarkable. But for those who know, it is a landmark of American psychiatry and a monument to the costs of silence. What remains is a question with no clean answer. Was this simply genetics? A cruel coincidence of inherited biology? Or did the house itself, with its discipline, its secrecy, its silence, create a pressure that magnified what was already there? I want to hear what you think. Was the Galvin family cursed by blood or broken by silence? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this records half-buried cases nearly lost, subscribe to Gothic Ledger. These stories will not surface on their own. They have to be unearthed. Because sometimes the truth is filed away, waiting for someone to open the envelope.